I'm back and I'm very excited to talk about the best books I read in 2023, my favourites of the year. So without further ado, let's get started. Firstly, I've got Delilah Green Doesn't Care and also Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail, which is the sequel, but I'll talk about Delilah Green because I don't want to spoil anything about Astrid Parker. So Delilah Green Doesn't Care is about Delilah who goes back to her hometown. She's a photographer and Astrid has asked her to come back because they are half sisters and Astrid wants her to be the photographer for Astrid's wedding. So while Delilah is back in her hometown of Bright Falls, which she has not gone back to for a very long time, she's set on kind of home wrecking Astrid's wedding because there's something off about it. And while she's there, she reconnects with Claire, who is one of Astrid's close friends, and they start to rekindle what could have been a great friendship in the past, and that turns into a romance. There is also a great only one bed trope in here, which is one of my personal favorites, and the writing style in here was just so humorous and upbeat, but it also talked about connections and grief as well because Delilah has lost her father. Because it touched on those darker topics but also kept things light and the romance a lot of fun, it was the reason I gave this 5 stars. Similarly, I gave this one 5 stars, but it was more of an enemies to rivals to lovers romance with also a home reno in there as well. Both of these were 5 stars and I adored them. Then I read Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. This is the sequel to Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and Ninth House follows Alex Stern. She can see ghosts, which is fairly unusual, and she goes on a scholarship to Yale University because they poach her specifically because they want her to help Darlington, who oversees the secret societies there. They want her to work with him and be trained up so that when he moves on and graduates, she can then take over the responsibility of ensuring that these secret societies don't get up to anything too untoward. But there is a murder on campus and Alex is thrown in way over her head. She also has a lot of issues with the different societies and a lot of stuff goes down. It's a dark but intriguing book and it's got those supernatural elements as well that can kind of get a little bit bloody as well. And I quite liked the concept of magic in a secret society. And the fact that Alex can see ghosts, she's just got a really dark past as well. So seeing all of that developed even more in Hellbent and watching the plot kind of explode with the world building was just fantastic. And I love these characters and I love this story and I can't wait to reread them because it was just so gripping and epic. And I could not stop being hyped about it when I put it down after I'd finished it. I already want to reread it and it really hasn't been that long. Then in a very big pivot from Hellbent, I read a memoir by Tom Felton called Beyond the Wand. And as someone who grew up loving Harry Potter, this was very nostalgic to me because it made you look behind the curtain, but it was also great having the audiobook as a listening experience because it was like Tom Felton was sitting across from me having a cup of tea and just explaining everything about his life. And he really uncovered a lot about the film industry, especially on Harry Potter and being a child actor, and just looking at public perception versus his own identity and how that was at a disparity. And it was very fascinating psychologically, and it was also just humorous at times as well because Tom Felton has great timing. So it was a really fantastic one to listen to and it wasn't very long either, so I smashed this out of the park and I really loved it. Then I read a post-apocalyptic book, which is one of my personal favorite subgenres, but it's really hard to find ones that I adore, but thankfully I discovered Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. I did read Parable of the Talents, which is the sequel, but I'm deciding to pretend it doesn't exist, and as far as I'm concerned this is a standalone. It works as a standalone anyway, so that is my new reality going forward. This book follows Lauren as our very young protagonist. She's in her teens and she's living in this gated society that's kind of small, but they are trying to survive. So there was this explosion of new drug way back when, and this has made a huge impact to the living costs and just survival rate of her society now. So it's kind of like our society currently in present day, except it's been regressed because of the drug use. A lot of amenities are really hard to get, not impossible, but difficult. And these characters grow a lot of their own produce and try and stay alive in their small town. So Lauren is very much looking at the very far ahead and she's starting to design her own religion because her father is a preacher and she doesn't necessarily agree with a lot of what he's saying. So the reason I love this is because the survival aspect is so intense and dark and these characters really have to reason through a lot. And Lauren's perspective sometimes should be annoying, but it's actually quite insightful and I really respected her a lot. And the quest kind of journey that she goes on is not really littered all the time with success, but I find it fascinating how she keeps seeing the hope in people. She's also got this affliction based on the drugs that are prevalent in society, and this affliction is that she can feel. She's like an empath, but to the nth degree. So when someone is injured in front of her, it's basically like she has also been stabbed. If she sees the injury, then she takes it on herself. So trying to hide that she is that kind of person in this very gruesome and violent world is very difficult, and she doesn't always succeed. I love this, and I'm very delighted to add a new post-apocalyptic story to my favorites list. It wouldn't be a favorites list if I didn't have a giant fantasy book on here. This is the third book in the Chorus of Dragon series called Memory of Souls, and this story is very loosely, because there's a lot of stuff going on, but it's very loosely about Kieran, and he's linked to a bunch of prophecies. How do I even begin to describe this book? Essentially, at the beginning of book 1, he overhears a conversation between a demon and some member of politics, potentially royalty. And this conversation was supposed to be very private. The demon realizes that someone is listening in, and so he gets a target put on his back. There is a lot more to it than just what is happening with Kieran, and I love all of the world building and the politics and how this reaches back generations and how that is so deeply interspersed with the magic system in here. Obviously, like I said, there are demons, there are also shapeshifters, there is Kieran learning magic, and just this series is so good. It also has a polyamorous romance in here with 2 characters aside from Kieran, and we get to see that trio really like flourish and interact in book 3, and I was waiting for the build up in books 1 and 2 to get to this point. So while I did love the first 2 books in this series, they got around 4 stars, 4.5 stars each. This one got a 5, just because I loved the way that the story progressed, and I loved the character development and how that all balanced with this trio. So good. At some point, maybe I should reread this, but I also reread the first 2 books this year because I'd read them in 2022, and I was like, I don't remember anything. Now, I don't think I have stopped raving about this book, so if you don't know that it was one of my favorites, I don't know where you've been, but Wolfsong by TJ Klune is way up there on my favorites list, so if you have not picked this up yet, why not? It took me way too long, but now the covers are being redone and these books are being re-released. So I also loved Raven Song, and Heart Song comes out in February 2024. So even though all of these books are technically out already, I'm reading them as the new covers are released, and I gave both of these 5 stars. This one follows Ox, who had an abusive father that left him very early in his childhood. So he's very unmoored and looking for that support. He's still got his mother, but that's not really enough. And in this small town, he goes to work at the local mechanics. And while he's being mentored by Gordo, the lead mechanic and the owner of the store, he also meets this family that moves in across the road from him called the Bennett family. And the Bennett family, if you couldn't guess, are werewolves. And Ox makes friends with this family. And as you could expect, there is a lot of found family in here. There is a lot of emotional distress and support in here as well. There's also obviously magic and werewolves and shapeshifting. I love it so much. It is so tense, and I felt so emotional. All of these characters, to me, feel real, and that is how much they are developed and fully formed in this story. I have so much respect for it. I also have so much respect for Raven Song as well. Like I said, these 2 books, incredible, 5 stars, and I want to reread them before Heart Song comes out as well. The fact that I want to reread them says a lot about how much I respect them and love them, and how much they have made a home in my heart. Speaking of making a home in my heart, I reread the Percy Jackson series, and I would love to include rereads on this list, but I'm not. However, I read a new book by Rick Riordan in 2023, and that is The Chalice of the Gods, which is a continuation of the Percy Jackson story. Essentially, he's got to go on 3 separate quests for the gods in order to get into university, and I thought, how good can this be? It seems a little bit gimmicky, but I don't know how he did it, but Rick Riordan pulled it off. It somehow amalgamates the characters that we know and love as they are older in a new setting for new readers who want to pick this up, but also with the nostalgia of what has gone on in the past. And I've got no idea how he managed to do that. I am just so hyped at the fact that we get 3 more Percy Jackson books and I get to revisit this world. I'm so excited. So I just love the spontaneity of these stories, the humor in them, but also the connection between the characters. It was all balanced perfectly in my opinion, and I cannot wait to continue this new trilogy. We've got a Percy Jackson TV series and a new Percy Jackson book. I'm just spoiled at this point with Percy Jackson. I am so happy. Then I was pleasantly surprised by this book, and I didn't expect it to reach 5 stars, and that is City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. This one follows Shara, and she is a foreign diplomat. She's secretly a spy, and she is the first one on the scene to investigate the death or the murder of her old mentor. There is a lot of political intrigue that is tied up in his death because he seemed to be the linchpin between a lot of old research into magic and the gods, and the faction of religion that are against the gods and want the gods to perish are very much against this guy. So there's a lot of suspects for his murder, and Shara is like, I need to get to the bottom of this, and accidentally uncovers the beginnings of an uprising, which is very intense. And I just loved the interplay between Shara and Sigrid. Sigrid is like her bodyguard, and he's not human. And just seeing him be almost like clunky but still clever because he's so big and direct, and Shara is more, I need to have a drink of tea and think about my plans. Sigrid is like, yeah, I'll go in and bash their heads together. I just loved seeing their dynamic and the world building of this story and the intent. It took over 100 pages to settle, but usually when I'm not liking a book, I did my DNFs of 2023. Usually when I'm not liking a book, as I've said in that video, I will realize fairly quickly and put it down. But with this one, I was like, I know there are nuggets in here. I like the way that this description is rolling out so far, and I want to know what happens next. And I'm so glad that I stuck to it because it was so epic. And it's kind of almost standalone-y. There are obviously threads that can continue because this is a trilogy, but I'm very satisfied by this book, and I also do want to continue. Then I also continued a series which is not going to be surprising to anyone if you've been on my channel for a while, and that is Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. This is a love story between Charlie and Nick, and Charlie is outed as gay and has been bullied quite significantly, but one day he's sat next to Nick in his form room and they form this lovely friendship, and this friendship builds into trust, and then Nick starts questioning things about his identity as well. It's a beautiful story about queer friendships, found family, and just budding romance. It's very sweet and humorous, and this one really touched on consent and connection, which I really appreciated and adored. So naturally that is why it is in this video, because I just love this series so much, and this new installment was perfect. But now on to my last 2 books. These are my 2 honorable mentions. So these didn't quite make 5 stars, but they were up there enough that I am excited about them and I want to talk about them. So one of them is Fence, or rather all of the volumes of Fence that are out so far. I believe this is going to be a rivals to lovers story between these 2 boys, but it starts out with Nicholas, and he is a fencing student who wants to be part of this fencing club at this college or university, but he's not as good as he thought compared to all of the others. He does have very significant things about his style that the others don't have, so it's an interesting dynamic to see him battling against everyone, and this is just great in the fact that it sets up everything in volume 1 and then it lets the characters develop even further as you get further into the story around fencing. It sets up a lot of the descriptions and the technicalities of fencing, so while that was interesting, it was more peripheral to me and I wanted the characters to kind of take up the forefront, but that really sets off after the first few volumes, and that's why I'm really hyped about it, because all you need for me is some great characters, some interplay, and potentially some tension that is romantic, and I am in for it. So that is what these are. These were fantastic and I cannot wait to continue. And then lastly, my final book in this video and my last honorable mention is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. I was surprised that I enjoyed this as much as I did. The reading experience for this book was just very surprising and so much fun, and halfway through I decided I need to talk about these feelings as I'm feeling them, so I started a spoiler vlog. So you can go and check that out if you like, but this was just so exciting. It's about Violet. She thinks she's going to the Scribe Quadrant, but at the last minute, her mother, who is the general for this war, forces her to join the Riders Quadrant. So she has to go to this murder school to figure out how to bond with a dragon and then ride that dragon into battle. This is more of a romance story than it necessarily is fantasy, but some of the fantasy elements really took the forefront of this book, and I really liked seeing that romance and fantasy blend in here. It's a new subgenre called romantasy, which I'm here for. It was so enjoyable, and there were some twists that I called, but I also don't really care that I called them because I was so excited about seeing them happen, and that's the sign of a good book to me. I was obviously very gripped by this, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. Usually with popular books, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna love it as much as everyone else. But with this book, I was like, I love it as much as everyone else, which was a very nice surprise. But that is all of the books that I have to talk about in this video. If you are thinking about reading them, please do, because they are so good. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.